So welcome to our colloquium on Sir Walter Scott's journal. We're privileged to have three distinguished contributors speaking today, two former presidents of the club and our honorary secretary. So the format is that we'll hear all three speakers, and after that, there will be an open discussion with an opportunity to raise any questions or comments. I'll briefly introduce each speaker before we hear from them. So we'll begin with an introduction from our Honorary Secretary, David McClay, a familiar figure to us all. David is Head of Development at the British School at Athens. Before taking up that post, he was at the University of Edinburgh Heritage Collections and the National Library of Scotland. David is also a former trustee of Abbotsford, the home of Sir Walter Scott. So let me hand over now to David.
Thank you, Madeline, and thank you for those of you who have joined us today. I thought it would be useful to start off the colloquium today just with a reminder for some of us of the circumstances of Scott's journal, both why it was started, how the physical journal has survived since, how it has been edited and published, and some of the reception. For some of you, this may be familiar territory, but I thought it would be useful as a reminder for us all in any case. So let me start with how Sir Walter Scott started his journal. On the 20th of November 1825, he wrote, "I have all my life regretted that I did not keep a regular journal. I had myself lost recollection of much that was interesting, and I have deprived my family and the public of some curious information by not carrying this resolution into effect." He goes on to mention his recent reading of Lord Byron's unpublished 1821 journal, written in Ravenna, Italy, as a direct inspiration for his starting one. Scott surely would have been delighted in reading Byron's entry for the 12th of January 1821. Scott is certainly the most wonderful writer of the day. His novels are a new literature in themselves, and his poetry as good as any, if not better, only on an erroneous system, and only ceased to be so popular because the vulgar learned were tired of hearing Aristides called the just and Scott the best, and ostracised him. I like him too for his manliness of character, for the extreme pleasantness of his conversation, and his good nature towards myself personally. May he prosper, for he deserves it. I know no reading to which I fall with such alacrity as a work of W. Scott's. Scott had also recently, but doesn't mention in his journal, read the first published edition of Samuel Pepys' diary. His son-in-law, John Gibson Lockhart, had given him an early copy with a request to review it for John Murray's Quarterly Review, for which Lockhart had recently been appointed editor. Lockhart noted that I never observed him more delighted with any book whatsoever, and a positive review article subsequently appeared in March 1826. As well as the influence of Byron and Pepys' journal, the departure of Lockhart and his daughter Sophia to London was a significant loss to Scott, with his only daughter Anne and the children remaining in Abbotsford. Without consultation and companionship, the journal may have provided Scott's losses had only just begun. Scott's wife Charlotte had deteriorating health and would die months later in May 1826, and the personal and national financial crises unfolded over the coming months and remained until his death less than 7 years later. The journal then is an invaluable record of his efforts to pay off his debts, his various writings, his friendships, and his declining health. At the beginning of the journal he wrote, "I am enamoured of my journal. I wish the zeal may last." And it did. He kept it irregularly, throwing aside all pretence to regularity and order, and marking down events just as they occurred to recollection. He continued it between 20th of November 1825 and the 14th of April 1832. That is a span of 2,337 days, or a little under 6.5 years. Physically, it is 2 quarto volumes. The volume height is roughly 23.5 centimetres. Scott described them as, "Behold, I have a handsome locked volume, such as might serve for a lady's album." These were nicely bound in vellum. The 2 manuscript volumes cover 358 and 308 pages. The journal was kept in the family, with his daughter Sophia afterwards transcribing it, and the handwriting is typically Scott. Cramped, not easily to decipher to the unpractised eye, especially as his health deteriorates, where it becomes atrociously difficult, so that a perfectly confident and accurate transcription becomes near impossible. It was clearly an object of affection for the family, it being shown to distinguished visitors to Abbotsford. For example, on a preliminary fly-leaf of Volume 1 are the signatures of Queen Victoria and her children Helena, Louise, and Leopold, dated the 22nd of August, 1867. The family, however, sold it around 1900 to the great bibliophile Pierpont Morgan, and in the Morgan Library in New York it remains to this day. Sophia's transcript was the version Lockhart used, as we recently heard from our president, Professor Peter Garside, in the first substantial appearance of Scott's Journal in print, which was in Lockhart's 7-volume Memoirs of the Life of Sir Walter Scott, published 1837 and 38. This was particularly useful in the last 2 volumes, which carried substantial journal extracts. Lockhart described it as the most candid diary that ever man penned. He clearly had not read Byron's diaries and journals, but his general point was well made. Scott, knowing his fame and the interest in his writing, of course foresaw its eventual publication. You may recall my opening quote about the journal being of interest to my family and the public. So he doubtless presented a conscious version of himself, especially in presenting his response to the financial challenges in a flattering light. As biographer John Sutherland has wrote, in these appalling, humiliating circumstances, it evidently became more important than ever that he should preserve a noble image of himself in extremis for posterity. The first substantial edition was edited by David Douglas and published as the Journal of Sir Walter Scott in 1890 in 2 volumes, alongside an American edition. It was reissued the next year, and again in 1910 and 1927, when the text was reworked and the notes expanded by Professor Hume Brown. Afterwards, Thomas Nelson reissued the journal through the 1930s in its affordable classic series. John Guthrie Tate, formerly principal of Central College in Bangalore, objected to the editing of the journal, especially what it had left out, and he produced a slim volume, The Missing Tenth of Sir Walter Scott's Journal, published by Oliver and Boyd in 1936, to draw attention to these omissions. He was then tasked by them to edit a new edition between 1939 and 46. This 3-volume version was produced by collating the Douglas edition against a recently acquired photostat copy of the original manuscript held in the National Library of Scotland. Following Tate's death, the editorial task was completed by one William N. Parker. And of course, the best modern edition was then produced by Eric Anderson and was originally published by Oxford's Clarendon Press in 1972 as an academic work, and then as in a popular paperback editions thereafter, principally from Canongate. Whilst the textual corrections were generally minor, Anderson's edition is amply annotated. It's for these annotations that it stands above the others. Whilst it contains a wealth of information on Scots and other people, Edinburgh and the borders, its one restriction is, according to Anderson, that it is candid about Scott himself, however it is neither informative nor candid about other people. The journal was widely considered one of the finest diaries. On its first fuller publication in 1891, Algernon Swinburne wrote that too long delayed publication of his journal is in every way an almost priceless benefit, but as a final illustration and attestation of a character almost incomparably lovable, admirable, and noble, it is a gift altogether beyond price. Whilst Hesketh Pearson thought it perhaps the most valuable, certainly the most moving, of all his productions, And since it displays a man whose goodness of heart balances greatness of mind, incomparably the most interesting work of its kind ever written. Literary historian Oliver Elton, whatever else of Scots may lose its colour with time, the journal cannot do so, with its accurate, unexaggerated language of pain. Novelist Hugh Walpole called it the masterpiece of human nature, and Virginia Woolf, Scots journals are the best life of Scott in existence. They contain Scott in his glory and Scott in his gloom. In a few passages, Scott throws more light upon his genius and its limitations than all his critics in their innumerable volumes. I shall close these brief opening remarks with a final quote from John Buchan, who wrote that it is fortunate that we possess such a document for the most difficult years of Scott's life. Its biographical work is inestimable, and not less high is its quality as literature. For one thing, it is one of the most complete expressions of a human soul that we possess. There is no reticence and no posturing, because he is speaking to his own soul. Here are qualities which are found only at long intervals in the romances, a tenderness which keeps watch over man's mortality, and neither quails nor complains, a strange wistfulness, as if a strong and self-contained soul had at last found utterance. The greatest figure he ever drew is in the journal, and it is in the man Walter Scott. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David.